I'm gonna cover my mic a little bit, but I probably need to get YouTube Premium. But that was crazy though, how it fucking immediately popped up as soon as I said that. Hold on. Yeah, we're chilling. Oh yeah, just so you know. Oh wait, hang on, let me pause this. Just so you know, I do not have a second monitor, so it's a little harder to see for me to see what you type. So I'm trying to use my phone that's like in the corner of my screen as a second monitor. And even then, it doesn't really pop up all the time. Also, political corruption is too profitable for the shareholders. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you can see it also inside, even American politics. For example, like all these fuck, now I can't think of it. Uh, I'll just say elected representatives in Congress. I'll just say it like that. Their stock they make 300,000 a year. Hang on, let me check actually how much the exact amount is. Oh shit. Got here F12. Yes, men make a year. All right, so the House of Representatives is 174,000. So they make around 174,000 a year, yet their net worth balloons from like 300,000 to multi-millions. I mean, it's obvious. Like, for example, insider trading, and then them giving money to their friends, and then barreling. At least I'm pretty sure that's how you pronounce it. Like, I mean, yeah, it's because there is no accountability. That's why we need heavy accountability. It's like what Asmongold says: public figures deserve public executions for their crimes. And I'd say that stealing millions of dollars and giving to your friends is definitely public execution worthy. Shit. Here, let me go back real quick. Oh, snap. Oh, I got to paste that link in chat too. Yeah, definitely sub to Nick Shirley.
Why are cities liberal and rural areas conservative? We often think of red states and blue states, especially as we watch the presidential election results every 4 years. But those maps are a simplistic view of American politics. Looking at county level maps gets us closer to reality. Now,
Yep.
some Republicans love that map, but it really shows land, not people.
Yeah, it's
and
just
land doesn't vote. Here's a look that's even better, which shows the counties raised by population level. This is actually the best look at the American political divide.
It is and it isn't. I mean, to be fair, I mean, most areas are really in reality a 60-40, like a 60% conservative or a 60% liberal. I mean, it's not going to be all blue and all red.
Liberal
But it definitely does give a good idea and a little bit of better interpretation.
cities surrounded by conservative countryside. Look, I live in liberal California, where we also have millions of rural conservative voters. And they're overwhelmed by even more millions of left leaning voters living in San Francisco and Los Angeles. And it's the same story in New York, Illinois, Oregon, really almost all American states. And it's a pattern we see in many parts of the world as well, with cities in the countryside voting like they're two different countries. What really surprised me when I started researching this video is that in America, this is a very new phenomenon. Like, it happened in my lifetime. I'm Ken LaCourte. This may not be as edgy as my typical video.
I'm trying to think, and well, I guess he's had a much more experienced lifetime. Like from my point of view, I mean, it's kind of been like that my whole life, and I would expected it to have been like that ever since the country's origins. Actually, I feel like it's a little bit I am a little bit more correct because even taking a look at the Federalists versus Anti-Federalists back in the late 1700s, it still kind of showed the early divide.
But if you really want to understand politics, it's a vital one.
But he's probably talking about more rather than cities and rural countrysides.
As always, I try to look past the simplistic explanations and do my best to give you something as close to the actual story as I can manage, at least in 20 minutes. In this video, I'll first...
Yeah, it's really hard to condense so much information in 20 minutes onto a watchable YouTube video. Like, you're not cutting corners, but you're just condensing so much information that you're bound to slip-ups in some places.
explain how it wasn't always like this. Then look at the underlying values that laid the groundwork for the separation. Then a look at history, starting with how LBJ changed everything in the 1960s.
I'm guessing that has a little bit to do with the Vietnam War. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing that's kind of where it started.
Follow it up by looking at the decade it split.
Because, you know, like the hippie movement.
And finally, what keeps them apart today. What you're about to hear...
Now I got an easy question for answer number 5, or question number 5, and that is mainstream media. It has, in my opinion, never been so obvious that they're constantly trying to divide the people so they can always stay up on top. I'll make sure chat's still working. Yep. We're chilling.
There isn't really the red versus blue fight. It's a look at identity and values and who gets left behind when economies change. To me, that's a more interesting story. So if it wasn't always like this, what was it like? Now, I worked in political campaigns before many of you were born, and then in the news business for decades, but I never fully understood until now how this massive shift has been going on for decades. This chart makes it clear. It shows post-World War II support for Democratic presidential candidates by region. Blue is urban, the green is rural. As you see, in the 40s and 50s, they're pretty equal and move in tandem. Then we see them both move up, more Democratic, in the Kennedy and Johnson years. Then, all the Democratic numbers drop as Richard Nixon is elected twice, but a lot more among that green rural America. The partisan gap, it stays similar until the early 1990s, before the lines separate entirely and they never connect again. In fact, they're still separating. The gap between urban and rural presidential...
And with mainstream media, it's only going to become even worse and worse. The divide is only going to become even bigger.
voting was 33% in 2020 in the Trump versus...
I mean, you don't even have to take my word for it. You can just look outside, you know, do a little bit of research. Go online for 30 seconds, and you'll see what I mean.
Biden contest. In 2024, it widened even more. We're looking at a fundamental restructuring of American politics that happened within a single generation.
Sorry to pause so many times. And I also think the biggest divide is, or the biggest jump is going to be is going to be in 2028. If the Democrats continue to stick with their what is it called? Yes, their identity politics, it's going to go even bigger, and they're just going to lose again. They need to revert back to their old ways.
It's really unprecedented in American history. And here's another data point to think about. As recently as 2000,
they're good old
Republicans
ways,
governed
not the bad
half
ones.
of the 12 largest American cities. It was the tail end of the GOP urban era. Today, of the top 30 cities, 27 have Democratic mayors. Only 2 are led by Republicans. The GOP has largely vanished from urban leadership. On the flip side, rural America certainly wasn't always this conservative. In the late 1800s, the People's Party, a genuinely left-wing populist movement, came roaring out of the countryside, pushing for government intervention against banks and railroads. Farmers were the radicals back then. In the early 1900s, socialist organizers built strong bases of support among tenant farmers and coal miners in rural states.
Because they are ultimately the ones who created the entire economy. They are the literal backbone.
Socialist Party locals and radical unions, they flourished in small towns and mining camps, including the industrial workers of the world, which demanded public control of key industries. Now, today, that framing feels almost impossible, but it's a good reminder that political geography can and does shift, and someday it will again. So I realize here that I'm mainly talking about urban and rural areas and basically ignoring the suburbs. I mean, they're an important part of the political landscape.
The suburbs are almost like a combination of both.
And their mix of both geographies, they often makes them ground zero for electoral battles. But to really understand that suburban mix, it's still a lot easier to spend our time at the ends of the spectrum. All right, We'll get into the specific moments that broke the map open, but we need to talk about something fundamental: the underlying values that have historically separated urban and rural Americans. And by those values, I mean more than who they vote for, but the
Understanding their differences with what they do in their lives, and most importantly, what they think and what should be done,
psychological,
and how to improve it or improve their life.
social, and political views that we see between people who live in cities versus the country. In fact, when I started researching this video, I assumed it was mainly going to be about these factors because many of them seem kind of obvious and it's what you hear all over the place. Now, they're important, but as you know, there's a catch because if they were the primary drivers of the divide, we wouldn't just have seen the changes I just described. Like virtually all of the videos I do here, these answers aren't simple. They're an interplay of multiple causes and reactions. I
Correct.
say it a lot, but the world is a complicated place. So let's start with
Yeah, yeah, it is. Also, real quick, I'm gonna go get some water and then I'll be back.
the cities. There's a shorthand that political scientists use to explain why cities trend liberal. The 3 Ds: density, diversity, and degrees. Each one does something different, and together they can look like a machine for producing liberal voters. Start with density. When you pack millions of people into a few square miles, problems that rural Americans can handle individually become everybody's problem. Your neighbor's trash is a public health issue. One person's building problems that can affect people around it. A single broken water main can leave thousands of people without water. Everyone shares the same infrastructure: the subways, the parks, the hospitals, because there's no real alternatives. Government stops feeling like an intrusion and starts feeling
It starts to feel more like a necessity. It has to take part in people's daily lives to control the chaos.
like the thing that keeps those things moving. And cities aren't just dense, they're loud and in your face. Homelessness isn't an abstraction when you have to step over someone on your way to work or see the people doing the fentanyl flop on the sidewalk outside of your apartment. Cities make inequality visible in a way that's
Nah, it's the fentanyl, but I that's a good one. The fentanyl flop. I might use that one later.
hard to ignore as well. And visible problems often produce demand for governmental solutions. They're also diverse, although I'm not sure I agree with the standard narrative here. It says that cities put you in daily contact with people who look, talk, and live differently than you. Now, that's true. But it also goes on to say that that exposure tends to reduce the instinct to see outsiders as threatening and nudges people towards policies that protect everyone. But I've also seen opposite data that says the more some ethnic groups interact, the less tolerant they become. So
It has everything to do with how many are coming in. How well can they integrate with the society that's already living there before? Sorry, John.
I'm not quite sure on that one. Either way, one thing that
Excuse
does
me.
seem clear to me is the selection effect. Cities draw people who are comfortable with strangers and novelty. They rank higher on the big 5 personality trait of openness, and that correlates with liberal politics even before someone moves to the city.
That is also a problem too, because it also attracts more bad actors. I mean, if you take a look at like that, since the FBI is, a federal and not state issue, they have a little bit more accurate data. And you can just immediately see, like, on the FBI's, I forgot what website it is, but I remember doing I was in a criminal justice class, and we were researching the differences between rural and city crime. And I think there's like 1 or 2 crimes per 1,000 people in like rural towns, and it was like uh 100 per 1,000 in like cities.
So you're starting off with a population that already leans a certain direction.
And even though I can't truly verify that, from my personal experience going to cities, it has always been sketchy as hell with people. I have seen fentanylers, I've seen homeless people just fucking everywhere. And meanwhile, I go to a small town and there's just people walking and shopping. You don't see any homelessness. Nobody's nobody's getting mugged, and it's a hell of a lot safer. And there's more of a community built around it too.
And then the city can push them even further. Even older urban voters lean further left than their rural counterparts of the same age. It seems to be both who moves there as well as what living there does to you over time. Then there are degrees. Universities and knowledge economy employers, they cluster in cities, and highly educated workers follow. College education is now one of the strongest predictors of democratic voting, stronger than income or religion in many cases. Now, people say,
I remember taking an AP government class. The one thing that is above education is family values. That usually tells whether or not the person is, a Democrat or Republican. However, I think that is becoming less frequent
sometimes don't believe this, but when I
because I do have friends that are starting to divert away from their parents. For example, like they have Democrat parents and then they become Republican, and then some have Republican parents and then they become Democrats.
ran FoxNews.com in Manhattan, most of the people who worked there were left of center. They were the ones who lived there and applied for the jobs. And the same thing happens in the San Francisco tech world and a lot of other industries. Okay, so let's turn to the countryside. If cities run on collective solutions, rural America runs on individual ones. When you handle your own problems, you fix your fence, you hunt food, you run a small business, the government, especially the federal government, can feel less like a partner and more like a stranger with his hand in your pocket and giving you rules from far away.
Yep.
Ronald Reagan said it this way.
I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help.
Another thing, rural families often have roots going back generations in the same county, sometimes the same property. And that creates a very different relationship with tradition.
It creates more of an attachment to that area. They feel a little bit more loyalty to that area too.
With change and with outside.
And they again, like he says, they do not want change. They want to keep it going for a generation and generations.
Institutions telling you how to live. Again, when somebody in Washington proposes new land use rules or environmental regulations, a rural landowner, he doesn't hear policy. He hears someone who's never been within 100 miles of his property telling him what he can and can't do with it.
Exactly.
Faith plays a stronger role too, where churches in small towns are more part of the social infrastructure. They're where people gather, celebrate, and grieve, where they make sense of the world. And in a lot of places, the local church is community life. There's one more thing worth mentioning, and it doesn't get said enough. Rural America has genuine grievances that aren't about culture at all. Hospital closures, school consolidations, broadband deserts, infrastructure that hasn't been updated in decades. They're material problems affecting people, and sometimes those people feel that the political system has largely ignored them. Now, all this said, the urban-rural divide, it's not an American phenomenon. The same pattern shows up across dozens of Western democracies. The success of Britain's Brexit vote, adamantly opposed by London's elite, it's a great example. And you see similar patterns in a lot of other countries as well. But each country's history got them to that point in a different way. Before I go on, do you need an injury law firm? If you need to find one, it's a tough decision
go on and I'll go
because
get
they're
some
not all
water.
the same. There's a reason our sponsor, Morgan & Morgan, is America's largest injury law firm. They've recovered over $30 billion for their clients over 35 years, and they're licensed in all 50 states. They've got over 1,000 lawyers and 100 offices nationwide. And they handle more than car accidents. They handle medical malpractice, defective products, injuries at work, you name it. It's fair to say that you don't grow that big without doing something right. And they have a great track record. And they're going to help even if you're not going to court. I mean, I've seen the difference between dealing with a corporation yourself and having a lawyer deal with them. Too many people leave money on the table because they don't know how to properly fight for it. So if you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan. Clients don't pay unless they win, so their interests are aligned with yours, not with billable hours. They offer a free case evaluation, so it's worth at least finding out where you stand. To learn more, you can go to forthepeople.com/Ken LaCourte, which is linked below as well. All right, so back to politics. In America, our history had those 2 pivot points that I showed you on the chart. Now we'll look at the first one.
I feel like every single presidency has have like pivot points. I think though there are some that are definitely more key than others. For example, 2016, Donald Trump getting elected. I believe it was 1864 when Abraham Lincoln was elected or assassinated. I can't remember which. I could even get the year wrong. And then, you know, like, oh, I guess those are it's probably the two biggest off of my head. One because of recent memory, and then two because it's probably the biggest in American history.
which is how LBJ changed everything. Before he did that, though, the demographic map of the United States had been going through its own changes, which laid the groundwork. It came to be known as the Great Migration. Between the 1920s and 60s, millions of Black Americans left the South, where 90% of them had lived at the time. They moved to northern cities, where they became a massive urban voting bloc. Without the Great Migration, the civil rights realignment might never have had the political weight to reshape the map the way it did. It's one of the most important demographic shifts in American history, and it rarely gets mentioned in this context. The first wave, it was driven by tough life under the South's segregation and Jim Crow laws. Also, the spread of the boll weevil. It's a bug that devastated cotton crops.
I've actually never heard of this.
When your livelihood disappears and the law is actively working against you, it often makes sense to leave. The second wave came with the world wars and the industrial booms that followed. More jobs, more opportunity, and a sense that the North offered blacks a better shot at the American dream. The numbers are staggering. Between 1910 and 1920, just 10 years, the black population of Detroit grew by over 600%. In Philadelphia, it more than doubled. Chicago's increased by 150%. By 1970, more than 80% of Black Americans nationwide lived in cities outside the rural South. To put that in scale, the migration was larger than any single European ethnic group coming to America. It remade the urban North, and it set the stage for everything that followed. And what followed was the Civil Rights Movement, perhaps culminating when President Johnson pushed through the Civil Rights Act in 1964. The act unraveled the legal architecture of segregation in schools, workplaces, and public facilities in one stroke. Support for Democrats shot up in both urban and rural areas. But underneath that surge, coalitions that existed for decades started to come apart. Many white Southerners saw it not as basic fairness, but as the federal government forcing social change on their communities, and they started breaking with the Democratic Party as a result.
Thinking about that, and the way of life back then, it does make sense. But nowadays, like if it ever happened now, it'd seem just outlandish. It seems foreign.
What followed was a slow bleed through the Nixon years and beyond. The Democratic Party became increasingly
It almost seems like rather common sense policy.
associated with urban voters, civil rights, and cultural change. And it started to feel foreign to rural white voters who'd been part of its coalition for generations. The Great Migration and the white rural realignment are like two sides of the same coin. Two major coalitions shifted sides, and neither side fully understood what was happening at the time. One quick thing, I do my best to get these right, but if I made a mistake, tell me down below and I'll address it. My script, research notes, they're all down there. Also, I recently learned that for those who watch a lot of the videos here but aren't subscribers, you may not get all of them pushed up by YouTube. YouTube actually does sentiment analysis on headlines and thumbnails, and if they think something might be too offensive, they keep it inside the tribe. So the civil rights realignment started things moving, but the divergence really didn't get going until the 90s, the decade it split. And that was fueled by a combination of economic and cultural forces. Let's start with the economy.
My heart's fine.
Fucking
I'm only
ads.
40. Ignoring your heart health risk is
Because the economic story is stark. NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, took effect in 1994. It eliminated trade barriers between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Both parties said it would make everyone richer, but in rural America, the factories started closing. Between NAFTA, automation, and China taking over manufacturing, over 80,000 American plants shut down.
I'm actually a little surprised it's actually that high.
Fewer in the cities where the knowledge and tech economies were starting to boom, and more in small towns and mid-sized cities that had built their entire identity around a single industry. and those jobs didn't come back. Take Danville, Virginia as one example, among thousands. A single textile company, Dan River Mills, employed 6,500 people at 7 mills in 1993.
Now that I'm thinking about it, it actually does make a little more sense because I remember going through a town and there's just abandoned factory after abandoned factory.
8 years later, every single one of those jobs was gone. Danville didn't get a tech hub. It got vacant buildings and an opioid crisis, with the drug overdose deaths tripling. That opioid crisis, it fed the narrative that people started to believe in small towns across the country, that nobody in power cared about them. The family farms were also disappearing, along with jobs and
That is definitely for true. There are less and less family farms here, and then more farmland is starting to turn into the suburbs. Hell, not even a block away, a whole farm lot that I always grew up with it being a farm as a kid turned into a suburban area with houses left and right.
mining and other industries. At the same time, cities were getting more cosmopolitan, more secular, more globally connected. Quick social change on gun control, gay rights, and abortion felt to many rural communities like values being forced on them from the outside. Rural voters didn't just disagree with those positions, but felt actively targeted by them. Country music, pickup trucks, the American flag, the cross, they became symbols not just of rural America, but of the Republican Party. The cities had their problems too in the 90s, with urban decay and sky-high crime rates. They pushed for gun restrictions, expanded social services.
Gun restrictions are not the way to go. They are not the root of the issue. The issue is the lack of enforcement on the laws that have already been created. Man, when I take a look at like California and Texas, Texas has a hell of a lot less gun regulation than California. Yet California has a hell of a lot more crime.
And police accountability. But cities were also changing in other ways. They were getting richer, more educated, more diverse.
And the funny thing is, too, the ones with the biggest guns are the ones that are safest. Like, for example, like, you know, all the big YouTubers with all the huge gun collections, 1,000 guns behind them, you know? They are the ones who are the most patriotic and will defend the Constitution and the laws and for what they stand for. And they're not there they don't use the guns to rob, to kill, to anything, but only to protect themselves. And maybe to show off a little bit.
Gay communities were becoming a political force. A generation coming out of college had a new set of priorities, and the symbol shifted with them. Pride flags, bike lanes, farmers markets. They didn't see the rural reaction as cultural self-defense. They saw bigotry. To many urban voters, the old arguments about guns and God felt like relics. The country was changing, the cities felt like they were leading it, and the Democratic Party was finally saying out loud what a lot of urban Americans had believed for years. And now, what keeps them apart? It's more than just political beliefs, but a set of mechanisms that have made that divide self-sustaining. The chart's divergence line is still moving, and nothing in the current political structure seems built to reverse it, at least nothing that's apparent right now.
And I don't think it ever really will until you know, the big media companies finally learn their lesson and realize, oh shit, this well, actually maybe not, because they do kind of do it on purpose.
Start with
So never
geographic
mind.
sorting, which compounds itself every year. Educated young professionals, they leave those small towns that offer little prospects and they drift left. People who stay put in those small towns, who buy property, start families, put down roots, they tend to drift right. Over time, each place becomes a more concentrated version of itself. In primary elections, they make it worse. In safe districts, which most districts are now, the only real competition happens in a primary. Between gerrymandering and other advantages that incumbents have, it's shocking at how rarely one of the 435 members of Congress loses re-election. In 2024, a big political change year, only 11 members of the House lost their general election. 4 had lost their primaries. That's not a lot out of 435. And
Nope.
primary voters, they're the most committed, the most hardcore members of each party. So the incentives for politicians, it's not to appeal to the middle, it's to excite those superfans by telling them what they want to hear. The result is that the people who represent...
And that's the unfortunate thing too, is because you'll become more and more bipolar on each side. If you tell each side that they are correct and the entirety of the other side is all wrong, like I said, everyone's going to become more and more bipolar, and it's just become shittier because nobody will agree on anything.
Rural America get more
And thus, less will get done and more conflicts will brew.
conservative. The people who represent urban America get more liberal. And the two sides have less and less to talk about. And then there's the media environment, where most news outlets have become partisan, whether they admit it or not. Add on top of that the computer algorithms that give each of us a separate diet of the information that we like to hear. And because we live near fewer people who we disagree with.
Yeah, it's selected. It's selective because they're all competing for your time. I think that like social media apps are they're definitely how do I say this? How do I put this into perspective? Like social media apps are I think more, at least I like to think, more free, but at the same time they also do have an agenda.
There's even less friction to correct it. If there are even any people who challenge your assumptions, they're likely faces on a screen, not people you actually know. Rural and urban America became two genuinely different lived experiences, each side often seeing the worst motives on the other. We're still seeing some realignments, though. The Trump coalition reshuffled things in a way that really didn't fit the old map neatly. More working-class voters of all races, fewer college-educated suburbanites. Whether that represents a genuine reordering or just a temporary disruption, that's a fascinating question for the next few years.
Actually, I don't think it was more. Well, it was and it wasn't. It was more of the Democrats becoming even more polarized and becoming defined by their own extremists. And if they parted from the fixed narrative, they'd get outed and eaten alive by their own side.
But the underlying structure, the self-sorting, the media silos, those aren't going anywhere. They're going to outlast politicians. It's baked into the system until something we probably don't even know about comes along to change it. Okay, so when I spend a lot of time looking into the growing political divide in America, I sometimes can't help but think we're all going a little crazy. Until I look around the world a bit, then I feel better. And when my gaze stops on North Korea, I think we're all doing pretty well, because that country is certifiably insane. I mean, some of it's goofy, like teaching people that Kim Jong-un learned to drive at age 3, or that his dad invented the hamburger. But most of that craziness, it's dark and evil, like executing people for watching the wrong TV show. Or if you commit a crime that sends you to prison, your children and grandchildren get locked up with you as well. But how? How did a country of 26 million people...
Oh, he's baiting us for the next video. Shit. Should have realized that. But yeah, that was a really good video. I'll send this one in chat too.